Welcome to Heidegger 1030, and we are presently by the coastline. Swedish west coast. That would be Skagerrak. Nice and sunny after 10 days of rather gruesome weather. Well, at least the farmers got their share. Now they have no reason for complaining anymore, I'd say. Let's see if I can get into the picture here. So I will continue today to speak about affordances and how they can help us to understand Heidegger. And today's lecture is named "What happens when we learn to attend to affordances in a more functional, healthy way?" The lecture is also a question. Now I'm going to answer this first in different parts. Number one being, to attend to the affordance means the same thing as treating your car in a better manner. I would say there is no actual difference in there at all. It wouldn't even make any sense to sort of drop a difference with things I do in, so to speak, an outer world, or what I do in what, for instance, would be my head. Affordances don't make a difference. They both strive to make sense of themselves, so to speak. They speak by themselves, and affordances are the voice of the friend. So it's not so much to define them or getting a limited understanding on what they are. It's more about looking into what they could possibly do, depending where they are, how they work, and it's exactly the same thing as learning how a mobile works. It's all different functionings and whatever it is. Don't be tricked by functionings that they are mechanical. You have thoughts that are affordances as well. They also have their functionings. And by better learning those, you will be a wiser man. And that takes both what would be on the outside and what would be on the inside. This is no doubt a complete deconstruction of the idea of a difference between something that would be highly practical and something that would be more theoretical. It's an absurd division. Of course, you can have a profession as a mechanic, but that doesn't strictly mean that the affordances are placed outside, nor does that mean that they are placed inside. What I'm trying to point to is that that difference doesn't really make any sense. Now I'm getting to the point here. That is how affordances can teach us to be more in accord with daily life, whatever that daily life inhabits. Affordances is about learning how things are actually working, not how they should work. And this is, we mentioned so many times before, and it was in a way a recursive subject for the last 1,000 lectures. And that's the idea that what we did here in the West, so to speak, is to have a very preemptive take what things are. This is of course the amnesia. We already decided what things are, so the only thing we can sort of question is what, how, where, but the why is gone. This is going back to before the why, no doubt. And then you can ask the why question once more. And a why question, in contrast to a what question, doesn't necessarily have to be situated on the outside. It doesn't seem to make a difference. For instance, why should we construct this tool that can cut down leaves? That's internal as well as external. Involves something that in ordinary language could be called a thinking process, and it also involves an externality that takes into concord things that we do. Why doesn't really accept that ontic status that is so often assumed. And this is of course the amnesia, the heritage of the Western world, what leads to fixations with law of the excluded middle. It leads to an idea that theories are already decided from the beginning how they should look. They should accept a preemptive take on time and space, and not the quantum space and time which are actually derived, coming after the why. Still coming, still very important, but they're coming afterwards. Whereas Kant, no doubt, projected time and space into the world. And Kant, from a quantum perspective, would be a person that do the same thing. First perceive time and space, so to speak, or the openness that is before time and space, and then try to impose that on reality. And his own imposition, his own projection is what he sees and then observes. There is a definite loop-like feature to what Kant did. So the criticism could in a very coarse way be to say that you can't criticize Kant for being extremely inner or extremely outer, but you could say he didn't interact much with whatever that was, his own thinking or the externality of his hometown Königsberg, or for that matter his friends there. When I say interaction, I don't mean going out simply. It means that you project something actively. You have an imagery of things. Your fantasy is not a slave of your own projections. It projects openly whatever it like. And that open projectedness, that I would say is participating in an outward manner with the affordances, no matter if they are generally or in common sense to be called inner, or in common sense term to be called outer. And what Tony Chemero and J.J. Gibson, the Obi-Wan Kenobi of cognitive science or ecological psychology, showed is that question doesn't make much sense when you actually start dealing with it. And that's the problem. It's not a helpful thing to believe in, no matter what. And this has consequences. Well, the Kantian view do, because it has been shown by Benjamin Libet that we let the decision process, because we don't actively project, we don't actively imagine, so we let that go over to circumstances, automatic processes. And after the decision is taken, as Benjamin Libet showed, we project or designate or name what happened, our consciousness. But we know with 100% certainty it is automatic. So what we rid ourselves of is our ability to direct ourselves, our own decisions. This is vehemently sure proven. It's a surprising fact, but that is how it is. You can go either way. You can become depressed, but you can also see this as a certain indication that we need to change route altogether. And I would say affordances is definitely one of those things. And there is no happenstance that after Benjamin Libet got sort of acquired experiential knowledge, everything went towards ecological psychology when it came to the field of decision making. There was no longer any idea of projecting the ideas of thinking of representation, and that we do a weighing in the head, and we have pros and we have cons, and we weigh them. Should I go to the dentist tomorrow? Should I not? And you do this process and you come to a decision. It does not work like that. I don't know how many experiments. You're welcome to look in Ian McGilchrist's latest books, but I think all of what has been shown, researched in this theme is in that book, and it shows almost completely clearly that decisions are taken before any of the reflective consciousness of the West is in on the case. Whereas compared to the East, it's never the case. Decisions are always made consciously or aware. There is always a thinking going on. And thinking is not what we thought. Sorry about the pun. Thinking is not doing representations in your head. Never ever work that way. It's always in synergy with what you're doing. It's two factors going on, not just one. Sorry, it was an ant there that bit me. It is the exogenous meeting the endogenous, and whether the exogenous are your own thoughts, your ideology, your discipline, your way, your personality, or your memories, where they meet is where the thing happens. It's in the interactivity that things happens, not passively. Thinking can never be passive. It is not simply a matter of Sherlock Holmesian recognition of reality and weighing, putting together, adding, comparing. And I would say that actually goes for something that I mentioned in the last lecture, scale. Scale is not comparing two different things. Never, ever is scale that. Scale is by itself with no need for a comparison. And this is the point of Julian Barber, of course, but you can also see it in affordances. To say that scale would be in comparison is going into very deep water, and you'll be lost pretty quickly. Western decision making is more chance than an informed decision. It could, so to speak, be the thing that I mentioned earlier on, subject in front of object in space, or some other sort of locking device. But this is not what happens. This is how we represent it. What does actually happen is nothing. There is no action taking place. There is no awareness. There's no focusing. But we do know what happens is exactly as Benjamin Libet shows. After the fact, we designate the idea of consciousness to that. I was aware, I took that decision. But you are never. And as Tony Chemero said, you need to adjust your beliefs to what research has shown that is never the case. The thing is, we can learn from reality. We don't have to go against it. We can learn from it, and we can become aware of our own decision making. It would be ludicrous, since animals are obviously aware of their environment, their affordances, whether inner or outer, whether there are motives, whether there are perceptions, cognitions, emotions, anything. They are aware of it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there for a very long period. We can survive anyway, because our environment is extremely safe. Too safe, I would say. I agree with Heidegger there. It has become too safe, and we lost our grounding in the real world, in real values and real perception. I do not say, however, it would be, as Heidegger would say, a good solution with a disaster or catastrophe of that sort. That would make things exponentially worse, since we are now stuck in this. We need to, affordances come to us, we need a deconstruction be well known all over the planet, and then yes, we can invite obstacles, and we will see that they are not obstacles, they are helping things. The second is definitely the weird division between reality into objects and things like thoughts. This is taking away all the complexities of what you meet, and you just call it an object, thereby ignoring the two-handed properties, which are always different from different affordance. If it's a thought, an ideology, a fork, a tree, a sailing boat, a pharmacy, or a system that regulates purchase within the liquor store, and so forth and so forth. They all have their own thing to do. And somebody from system theory said to me the other day, this is obvious, I've been working with that all my life. Which sort of system I build is dependent on what it's supposed to do. Absolutely correct. That is what an affordance is. Whereas an object doesn't do anything. Doesn't make any sense. It blocks our curiosity, blocks our possibility of seeing the difference between different affordance. It's a killer of understanding. And this is what Auge Bohr, of course, meant when he spoke to his doctorate. Speaking about existence blocks action, blocks what they're supposed to be doing there. It blocks the interaction between the doctorate, the student, the observer, the scientist, and what he's trying to find out. It's a stopping mechanism. Not only doesn't it not add anything, it blocks out the idea. And this is exactly the same thing is if you were to participate in a course for beginning ornithologists, bird lovers, or bird seers. And for every time you get instructed this is a specific bird with that behavior, those colors, that wingspan, that head, those markers, those claws, that beak, and so forth. You just go and shout very loud, bird, it's a bird, it's a bird. And of course that stops everything. Once you no longer go into reality, once you are not willing to participate actively in finding out what something is, it's a disinterest in the study of birds. You will not learn anything either, and you will stop the learning of others because you shout bird all the time. This is how bad existence was for Åge Bohr. Much worse than wrong, of course. And we can understand that by deeply, actively imaginary going into it, and see that all affordances are inherently by normal things, because that's the outer world. How could the outer world be one and the same thing? An object. And what does an object mean? Doesn't mean anything. What does an existence mean? Why, look at it closer and you will discover it doesn't mean anything. It's a stopping of thinking. That's what it is. It's an empty spot. It's having brain hemorrhage. Then I won't think anymore. Jag har tänkt klart, as we say in Swedish. It stops here. The student in the class of Åge Bohr might as well start throwing flying paper dragons or airplanes at Åge and the others, and then splattering water all over the place. It's incredibly unhelpful. Yes, the amnesia enters existence into our thinking, but it's a mistake. It doesn't have anything to it. Therefore, I'm all for affordances, and this is of course more or less what Heidegger meant with Sorge and Zuhandeln, and in contrast to Vorhandeln. Vorhandeln is this oddity when things turns up for you, when you discover them, so to speak, out of context. But they all participate. This camera I'm looking into now, maybe it's not Vorhanden for me until the day it breaks. But then it won't play the same role. It won't be aware to me in the Zuhandeln way. It will lack in awareness. How come so? Well, it doesn't participate anymore. But then we would say, or some would say, well, you were never aware of the camera. You didn't mention it, it wasn't in your head. Well, our consciousness are representational. It means that there are no good accord to what we are aware of. And why should we make do with the reflective consciousness that doesn't really do anything and is not aware? Reflective consciousness is repeating the same process and having the final result after a sort of a sequential go-to thing in computer terms. And the last line says, I was aware. Awareness means interactivity, doing things. A broken camera or a mobile would be something I just observe. After that, I will interact with the mobile once more. It will once more be in my action. I will bring it to the mechanist. He will have an observation of it. He will interact with it. It won't be Vorhanden for him. So Vorhanden passes. This is when we discover something new. It's momentarily, whereas Zuhandeln is the more eternal, so to speak. The mechanic who hopefully fixes the mobile will be interacting with it. He will not just look at it and make a representation and say this is an existence and sit there with his arms clutched and look at it, drinking his coffee, and say after an hour that would be 500 crowns. Pay up. What have you done? Well, I represented it in my mind. That wouldn't make any sense. And it wouldn't be a reason to accept either. The same horrible thing we can do to ourselves. And I would say it's also affordances. Thoughts are affordances. By calling thoughts thoughts, we do the same thing as we do with other affordances. We call objects or things or thanks or relations or communication or socializing or whatever. It's a little bit like putting a face to the voice of the friend. It's diminishing what is already there. And calling them thought will stop you from getting into what the thinking is. And I would say this is the reason most people today don't carefully look onto what they are thinking. They are not seen as resources, something you can get into and understand. They are just blockages. So calling a thought is a blocking out of what you can discover. And you can discover a lot of things, and you can start to interact with your thoughts, your thinking, much more constructively. And that is good functioning. This is what is called in science of cognition, self-regulating. And of course, it also goes for things we call emotions and so forth. They are all affordances. Look into how they work. And they can always work in a different way. A thermos can work as a tool of opening a coconut, for instance. I wouldn't suggest it, because afterwards there wouldn't be a thermos. And it would be easy to lose the grip on the thermos. But if you don't have any choice, and that's the last coconut you have, why not do it? But doing so with all affordances you meet across your own thoughts, calling them negative, positive thoughts, will diminish what is in there or out there. It won't make for a complicated, jagged surface to enter into. So I'm not criticizing representationalism as an ideology. I would say it's more a tendency when we get sloppy. And of course we do more representation when we are tired and not focused. And when we are sick, when we have a cold, when we're really angry, upset, of course we do much more representation. This is of course the N2 neurons speaking, the ones who don't get into the depth, because they're constructed to make us help flee. And the flight and fight response is imminently present, and of course it makes it impossible for us to make an informed and well thought of response to the outer world. It becomes a habit, and we call that habit awareness or consciousness. But there is no such thing as consciousness at all, I would say. That's a nonsense thing. It's the blockage that we call consciousness. And we even assign positive things to that. I would say there's nothing positive with that. It's a lack of awareness in that moment. You are simply not aware. You say you see thoughts when you should see a much huger degree of complexity, more interesting, more encompassing, and giving you insight who you are, self-insight. Making it possible for you to discover hidden motifs, so to speak, hidden agendas in your own mind, or wants, desires. Maybe you always wanted to become a flyer, buy an airplane. Start windsurfing, why not? I think I saw a windsurfer earlier on. It's a good wind today to do that. Those are the things you can discover. You can also strengthen yourself. What would be a garden you never attend to? Well, that's the garden of thoughts. Thoughts as a stopper of thinking. Saying that's a thought, they are all thoughts, means that you can no longer look into yourself. That's stopped by the very perception of thought. Perception of thought is a no perception. It's a stopper, or very, very coarse. This is what Ian McKilcreast discovered, which he proposes in his book, The Matter with Things. And that is, we live in a simulacra today, a construction of our own. And that is the perpetual process that creates those etiquettes like object and thoughts that stop us from interacting, having an awareness, having a will, having that will becoming plans, becoming imagery, creativity, fantasy, and all these other negative denominations that we give to living, being, acting. We should not have fantasy. That sounds something that Plato would have said. Being in the amnesia, it's the descent of awareness and the downfall of focus. We will not know our intentions, our deepest thought. We will not advance our thinking in ourselves. You will not put work with your inner thoughts, your whatever is inside of yourself, and therefore you will not develop, and your reactions will be simple, non-planned, automatic, not informed by understanding, and you will be left with this Chalmers-like consciousness, which is just a blank darkness, something where awareness doesn't reach. And the voice of the friend will, so to speak, remain unheard, unnoticed. It will be devalued into being the voice of that face, that name, that person. And what the voice sounds like will be reduced to words only. And everything about the living voice is now gone. This is the ontic take, of course. This is the what, this is the where questions, answer what label you give to the thoughts or whatever it is. It's a passive mood. The adding of features to the thoughts or the objects is absolutely automatic. It doesn't need any intention, strength, imagery or directedness. You can slouch or you can be overly stressed, which is actually amounts to the same thing. Your thoughts rushing about automatically, rushing your heart, giving too much blood pressure to your living cells, rushing your brain, stopping you from being able to make informed observations of reality, being in reality, coupled with reality, as Gibson would have called it, or in der Welt zu sein, mit seinen, to be together with. Let me give an example from science, something I remember when I studied linguistics. We went down the corridor and we went into the cellar where the much despised science department was located of linguistics, the phonetics, doing the practical work, where it was very hard to discern between theory and practice, and therefore abhorred the horror vacui and so forth. And there was a very dear professor called Per Lind or Per Lindblad, I don't know exactly, but he was a very jolly fellow. I really liked him, smart. And he showed, so to speak, that before even the sounds of the words were produced, there was a tone in language that informed everything. And he pointed to that complexity. This is speech. And then we transform it, we reduce it to sounds, phonemes, and those gets only word. I remember people who look for words most usually don't understand what other people say to them, because that is not hearing the voice of the friend. This is shutting your ears. All the information that is in the voice, and I remember when this question was posed, a rhetorical question for the part of the professor. Would you imagine that all this complexity you can see here, we looked into an oscilloscope, a sort of a more primitive model of the amplitude machine of Stefan Mangold. Do you think all this complexity here is just noise or disturbances in the human voice, and what actually the human voice should produce is the phonemes in the words? And I think that was an absolutely brilliant question. It was so brilliant I didn't understand it. I think it took me like 10 years. I did preserve it. I knew he had a point because who he was, but now I realize this is absolutely ludicrous. All that complexity in the voice, they would not carry anything. It would just be buzz, noise, abstractions to understanding the words, which are the important things in speech. I don't buy that, and when I much later heard about the sing-along, the prosody of language being the important part, because that is what you see in these disturbances. This we know, and that can actually be tested. People who listen into more of the complexities, those are the one who understands. Whereas those who have the preemptive take on, I'm going to listen into words, it's going to be a flow of words, or phonemes. Phonemes are the atoms of the words, the least, the smallest of the units in the words. The ka, and the pa, and the a, and the e. They don't understand. It's clearly proven. Then you don't reach understanding. And not being able to do that, it's not lack of hearing. Actually, you could be almost deaf and still hear what people are saying to you. There is somewhere, depending on the environment and everything, or what sort of helping tool you have, of course. But a person that could be tested to be absolutely sound of hearing are usually the most suspect for not hearing. Those are the one who looks for the words, and they fail to understand. And it's a scale on understanding. The more words you're looking for, the more phonemes you're looking for, the more predisposed you are in projecting automatically these things. Once again, Benjamin Libet experiments, or rather similar experiences, when you perceive sounds before they come to your ear, which is something that happens on a daily basis, happens in every sentence. But focusing too much on that will lead you astray. Mishearing is watching, looking, searching the words, that is actually mishearing. There is no other word for it. This is not an hyperbole, it's not an exaggeration. That is what mishearing is. Selective hearing, yes, they will be completely deaf, partially deaf, or deaf to a certain scale. But it is a deafness to hearing the voice. And that could very well be compared to giving a face to the voice, giving a body to the voice, giving a name to the voice. Those things are, I think, from a common sense perspective, superfluous, but they are actually much more than that. They are damaging to the hearing understanding. And you can get into that hearing understanding by being more present, being in the space you're at, going into the time you're at, open up to the voice and let the voice be whatever it is. This openness makes it possible for you to also project, oddly enough. Yes, project. So the more you project a fantasy for the person you imagine that you're hearing, which is not ontic, which is more of your imagination, your fantasy, your creativity, that is bound to be much more complex than the stereotyped idea of that the bearer of the name is Annika and she's 7'2" and that she weighs 10 stones, heavy girl. And she just recently went to Kirunavaara in the north of Sweden, and she wants to tell you about her visit. That will be excessive information, but that will also be a blockage to the voice, which is not the words, not the information in the voice, not the meaning of the name or what the face is compared to other faces. Remember, scale is always without comparison. We don't perceive scale by comparison, we perceive it directly. Scale is a property directly from reality. Of course, how else could animals perceive scale? It must be directly. They don't carry a measure with them, or they don't keep in memory what other things they see around you. It comes from the direct perception. Well, look at it as a TV screen. This is simplification. Look at it as a TV screen. Everything that is necessary that comes from the camera is in the TV screen. And that means that the smaller details on the side are not unimportant. So everything that surrounds the voice in hearing is also important. Everything that is in my visual field now, and it's much more than a TV screen, sorry for the simplification, but all that carry important stuff. Carrying the scale directly without a comparison that takes time. Take a lag, take 20 milliseconds or 50. I have to compare that to that. That will in that case be done after the fact. Well, look at the cheetah on the running on the savannah. Do you think you make comparison? Should I go for that prey or that prey? Should I take that wildebeest or the one next to it because it's bigger, smaller, and so forth? I don't believe that. It comes from direct perception. Yes, we have the ability to make comparison, but that's a whole other affordance, and that is done after, separately, more connected to pretension. Barbara Tversky showed that that is actually an advancement in thinking, but don't let that advancement take away the voice. That, yeah, I think that sort of nicely concludes this lecture. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.